The thunderstorm raged across the Montana prairie as Cassandra Nelson struggled to keep her small soddy from collapsing around her. Rainwater seeped through the earthen roof, turning the dirt floor beneath her feet to mud, but that was the least of her problems. The bullet wound in her brother's shoulder needed tending, and tending now before infection set in and took him from her like it had their parents last winter. "Thomas, stay still," Cassandra whispered, her voice quivering as much as her hands. She'd never removed a bullet before, but the doctor in Helena was 2 days' ride, and with the storm it might as well have been 2 months. Thomas groaned, his face contorted with pain. "Cass, leave it. The outlaws might come back." "I can't leave it. You'll die." Cassandra threaded the needle, but her fingers trembled so badly she couldn't manage to get it through the eye. She tried again and again, tears of frustration mixing with those of fear. The pounding on the door made her jump, nearly dropping the needle altogether. "Who's there?" She called out, reaching for her father's old shotgun. "Name's Reid Sutherland, madam. I'm seeking shelter from this storm. I've got a wounded horse." Cassandra hesitated, looking at her brother's pale face. Another groan from Thomas made her decision for her. "Come in, but I'm armed." The door swung open, bringing with it a gust of wind and rain. The man who stepped inside was tall, broad-shouldered, and soaking wet. His duster dripped onto the floor, adding to the growing puddles. But what Cassandra noticed most was the gentleness with which he closed the door, turning slowly to reveal empty hands. "I mean no harm," Reid said, his eyes taking in the scene before him, the wounded man on the bed, the young woman with the needle, the shotgun propped against the wall. "Looks like you could use some help." "My brother's been shot," Cassandra said. "I need to remove the bullet and stitch him up, but I—" Her voice trailed off as she looked down at her trembling hands. Reid shrugged off his wet coat and hung it by the door. "I've had some practice with bullet wounds," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Served as a field medic during the war." Thomas tried to sit up. "Don't let him touch me, Cass. We don't know him." Reid didn't move closer. "Your sister's right about infection, son. That bullet needs to come out and those edges need closing. I can help, but it's your call." Cassandra looked from Reid to her brother and back again. The stranger's blue eyes held no malice she could detect, only concern, and Thomas was getting weaker by the minute. "Please," she said finally. "Help us." Reid washed his hands in the basin of rainwater Cassandra had collected, then examined Thomas's wound. "The bullet's near the surface. Good news is it missed anything vital. Bad news is we need to get it out quick." He looked at Cassandra. "I'll need that needle threaded." Once again, Cassandra tried to thread the needle, but her hands shook so badly she couldn't manage it. The weight of the day, the raid on their home, Thomas's shooting, the storm, it all pressed down on her. "Here," Reid said quietly, coming to stand beside her. His hands, large and calloused but surprisingly gentle, closed over hers. "Let me help." He took the fabric she was working with and held it steady, then guided her hand with the needle. "Try now." Her hands shook as she tried to stitch. The cowboy held the fabric till it lay still. With his steadying presence, Cassandra managed to thread the needle and prepare several more for the work ahead. Together, they worked on Thomas's shoulder. Reid extracted the bullet with a small knife he carried, and Cassandra cleaned the wound with whiskey from her father's supply. Then came the stitching. Reid continued to hold the edges of the wound together while Cassandra sewed, her hands gradually becoming steadier with each pass of the needle. By the time they finished, Thomas had passed out from the pain, but his breathing was even and the bleeding had stopped. "You did good work," Reid said as Cassandra washed the blood from her hands. "Most folks would have fallen apart." "I nearly did," she admitted, "but you didn't." Reid's voice was firm. "That's what counts in this country, not how scared you get, but whether you keep going anyway." Cassandra studied him in the dim light of the oil lamp. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 26 or 27 to her 21 years. His dark hair curled slightly where it had begun to dry, and beneath the trail dust and days' growth of beard, his features were handsome. "Why are you out in this weather, Mr. Sutherland?" she asked, suddenly aware they were alone with her unconscious brother. "Reid, please." He moved back, giving her space. "I was tracking a horse thief when the storm hit. My horse took a bad step in a prairie dog hole about a mile back. I had to leave him in a sheltered spot and look for help." He glanced at Thomas. "Seems I found trouble instead." The men who shot Thomas were thieves too, Cassandra said. They took our two best horses. Reid's expression darkened. Describe them. Cassandra did, noting how Reid's jaw tightened at her mention of a man with a scarred face. You know them, the Blackwell gang, Reid said grimly. I've been after them for months. You're a lawman, Reid nodded. U.S. Marshal, I've tracked them from Wyoming. He looked around the small soddy. Is it just you and your brother here? Since our parents died last winter, yes. Cassandra straightened her shoulders. We managed just fine. A ghost of a smile crossed Reid's face. I can see that. He glanced at Thomas. Your brother needs rest now. Come morning, I'll check on my horse. If he's fit to ride, I'll head to the nearest town for the doctor. Helena's 2 days' ride, Cassandra said. Surely there's somewhere closer. I passed a small settlement about 10 miles back. River Spend. It's hardly more than a trading post, though there is a saloon. Cassandra's mouth twisted. No doctor. Well, we'll figure something out. Reid settled his broad shoulders against the wall. You should get some sleep, Miss Nelson. I'll keep watch. Cassandra, she said, or Cass. Everyone calls me Cass. Reid nodded, his eyes warm. Cassandra suits you better. It's a strong name. Despite everything, Cassandra felt a flush rise to her cheeks. I'll take first watch, Mr. Sutherland. You look like you've had a long day yourself. He didn't argue, simply tipped his hat and settled onto the floor near the door. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened, though Cassandra noticed his hand remained near his holster. Sitting beside Thomas, Cassandra wondered what twist of fate had brought the marshal to their door tonight. Coincidence, providence. All she knew was that for the first time since the outlaws had ridden away with their horses, she felt a spark of hope. The storm continued through the night, but by morning it had cleared, leaving behind a washed, clean world that sparkled in the early light. Reid was already awake when Cassandra stirred, brewing coffee from her dwindling supply. Your brother's fever broke in the night, he said without preamble. That's a good sign. Cassandra checked Thomas herself, finding his skin cool and his color improved. Thank you, she said simply. Knowing the words were inadequate, Reid just nodded. I'm going to check on my horse. I'll be back before noon. He was gone before she could offer him breakfast, though given their meager supplies, it was probably for the best. Cassandra busied herself with chores, keeping one eye on Thomas, who drifted in and out of consciousness. True to his word, Reid returned before the sun had reached its zenith. His expression was grim as he dismounted from a horse Cassandra didn't recognize. Your horse? She asked, stepping outside to meet him. Reid shook his head. Had to put him down, leg was broken. He patted the neck of the dun gelding he rode. Found this fellow wandering about a mile from here, thought he might be one of yours. Cassandra's heart leapt. Thunder, that's Thomas's horse. She approached the animal, who nickered in recognition. He must have gotten away from those thieves. Lucky break for us, Reid said. He seems sound. I can ride to Riverspend, see if there's anyone with medical knowledge there. I'll go, Cassandra said firmly. I know the people there. They'll be more likely to help me, Reid frowned. It's not safe for a woman to ride alone, even if it's just 10 miles. I've been riding alone since I was 12, Cassandra retorted, and someone needs to stay with Thomas. They stared at each other for a long moment before Reid conceded with a nod. Take my revolver, he said, handing it to her. It's loaded, you know how to use it, my father taught me. Cassandra checked the chambers anyway, then tucked it into the pocket of her skirt. I'll be back by sundown. Reid helped her mount, his hands lingering perhaps a second longer than necessary on her waist. Be careful, Cassandra. The ride to Riverspend was uneventful, the prairie stretching out in all directions like a sea of grass. Cassandra had made this journey countless times, but never with such urgency or with a U.S. Marshal's revolver in her pocket. Riverspend was little more than a collection of wooden buildings strung along the bend in the river that gave the settlement its name. The general store, the saloon, a small church, and a scattering of houses made up the entirety of the town. Cassandra headed straight for the store, where old Mr. Johnson knew everyone for 50 miles around. Cassie Nelson, he exclaimed when she entered. What brings you in? Thought you and Thomas weren't due till next month. Quickly, Cassandra explained the situation. Mr. Johnson's face grew grave as she described Thomas's wound and the marshal at their home. Ain't no doctor here, as you know, he said, but Mrs. Whitaker was a nurse during the war. She might be able to help, he squinted at Cassandra. This marshal, he say his name was Sutherland? Yes, Reid Sutherland, do you know him? Mr. Johnson nodded slowly. He's been through here tracking those Blackwell boys' dangerous work. He peered at her over his spectacles. You sure it's wise, leaving him with your brother? I trust him, Cassandra said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Mr. Johnson seemed to accept this. I'll fetch Mrs. Whitaker. You get what supplies you need. An hour later, Cassandra was riding back toward home with Mrs. Whitaker in a wagon behind her. The older woman had been reluctant to leave her own family, but the mention of a bullet wound had spurred her to action. In the back of the wagon were medical supplies, food, and 2 extra horses. Mr. Johnson had loaned them, a gesture of neighborly kindness that brought tears to Cassandra's eyes. They arrived at the soddy as the sun was beginning to set. Reid came out to meet them, his hand on his gun until he recognized Cassandra. Mrs. Whitaker, he said, nodding to the older woman. Thank you for coming. Marshal, she replied, climbing down from the wagon with surprising agility. Let me see this young man. While Mrs. Whitaker examined Thomas, Reid helped Cassandra unload the supplies. Johnson loaned us the horses, Cassandra explained. We'll need them to work the land until we can get our others back. Reid's expression hardened. I intend to get your horses back, along with bringing in the Blackwell gang. You can't go after them alone, Cassandra protested. There are at least 4 of them. 5, Reid corrected, and I've been tracking outlaws most of my adult life. Still, let's not argue about it now, Reid interrupted, his voice gentler. How's the food situation? You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days. It was true. The outlaws had taken most of their stored food along with the horses. We've been rationing, Cassandra admitted. No more of that, Reid said firmly. I saw rabbits on my ride today. I'll get us some fresh meat. True to his word, Reid returned an hour later with 2 fat rabbits. Cassandra prepared them with some of the potatoes and carrots she'd gotten from town, and soon a savory stew was bubbling in the pot over the fire. Mrs. Whitaker joined them for the meal, pronouncing Thomas on the mend. He's young and strong, she said. The wound is clean, no sign of infection. You did good work, both of you. She eyed Reid and Cassandra appraisingly. You make a good team. Cassandra felt her cheeks warm at the implication, but Reid just nodded. Miss Nelson has a steady hand when it counts. After dinner, Mrs. Whitaker announced she would stay the night to monitor Thomas. You 2 should get some rest, she said. I'll wake you if there's any change. With the soddy being a single room, privacy was non-existent. Reid offered to sleep outside, but Cassandra wouldn't hear of it. The ground is still sodden from the storm, she said. You'll catch your death. In the end, they arranged pallets on opposite sides of the small home, with Mrs. Whitaker keeping watch over Thomas in the middle. Despite her exhaustion, Cassandra found sleep elusive. She was acutely aware of Reid's presence across the room, his breathing deep and even. What would happen when Thomas was well enough? Reid would continue his pursuit of the Blackwell gang, and life would return to its hard, lonely rhythm. The thought brought an unexpected ache to Cassandra's chest. Morning dawned clear and cool. Reid was already outside when Cassandra woke, tending to the horses. Mrs. Whitaker reported that Thomas had slept through the night and was significantly improved. I need to get back to my family, she told Cassandra, but I think your brother will be just fine now. Change the bandage daily and watch for any redness or swelling. After Mrs. Whitaker left, Cassandra found Reid splitting wood beside the small barn. He worked with efficient strength, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. Mrs. Whitaker says Thomas will be fine, Cassandra said, approaching him. Reid paused, wiping sweat from his brow. That's good news. When will you leave? The question came out more abruptly than she'd intended. Reid studied her for a moment before setting down the axe. The Blackwell gang won't stop with your horses. They'll hit other homesteads, hurt other families. I need to go after them. I understand, Cassandra said, though a part of her wanted to argue. When? Tomorrow, if your brother continues to improve. Reid stepped closer to her. Cassandra, I can't in good conscience leave you 2 here alone, not with those outlaws still in the territory. Hope flickered in Cassandra's chest. What are you suggesting? Come with me to Helena. You have family there, you said. An aunt, Cassandra confirmed. But this is our home, our land. If we leave, we could lose everything. Reid's expression was sympathetic but firm. If you stay and the Blackwells return, you could lose more than land. Cassandra knew he was right, but the thought of abandoning the homestead her parents had worked so hard to build was almost unbearable. "Let me talk to Thomas," she said finally. Inside, she found Thomas awake and alert, though still weak. She explained Reid's plan, expecting resistance. To her surprise, Thomas agreed. "We can't stay here, Cass," he said, his voice thin but determined. "Not now. Marshal Sutherland is right, those men might come back, and we can't work the land properly without our horses anyway." "But what about winter?" "We need to bring in the harvest, prepare, we'll come back," Thomas assured her. "Once the Marshal has dealt with these outlaws, Aunt Martha will take us in, you know she will." Cassandra sat back, considering. It was true that their aunt had often urged them to move to Helena after their parents' deaths, and with Thomas wounded and their best horses gone, working the farm would be nearly impossible. "All right," she said at last. "We'll go to Helena." The decision made, Cassandra threw herself into preparations. They couldn't take much, just essentials and whatever would fit in the wagon. Everything else would have to be left behind and hoped for the best. Reid helped without being asked, his presence a steadying force amid the chaos of packing and planning. He seemed to anticipate what needed doing before Cassandra could even mention it, from reinforcing the wagon wheels to fashioning a comfortable bed for Thomas in the back. That night, their last on the homestead, Cassandra found herself unable to sleep once again. She slipped outside, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cool night air. The moon was nearly full, bathing the prairie in silver light. In the distance, a coyote called, a haunting sound that seemed to echo her own melancholy. "Can't sleep." Reid's voice came quietly from behind her. Cassandra turned to find him leaning against the doorframe. "Too much on my mind," she admitted. Reid moved to stand beside her. "Having second thoughts. About leaving? No, Thomas is right, we can't stay, not now." She looked up at the vast, star-strewn sky. "But this place, it's all I've known since I was 16. My parents are buried here." Reid was silent for a long moment. "The land will still be here when you return," he said finally. "And your parents, they'd want you safe above all else." Cassandra nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. "I know." They stood together in companionable silence, watching the moonlight play over the prairie. Cassandra was acutely aware of Reid beside her, solid and reassuring. Without thinking, she leaned slightly against him, drawing comfort from his warmth. To her surprise, Reid's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her gently against his side. "It'll be all right, Cassandra," he murmured. "I promise." In that moment, standing under the vast Montana sky with Reid's arm around her, Cassandra almost believed him. The journey to Helena took 3 days, slower than usual due to Thomas's condition. Reid insisted on taking a more circuitous route to avoid any potential encounters with the Blackwell gang. He rode ahead each day, scouting the trail, then returned to guide the wagon through the safest paths. On the second night, they camped near a small creek. Thomas was sleeping in the wagon, his condition stable but still requiring rest. Cassandra sat by the fire, mending one of her brother's shirts by the flickering light. Reid joined her after checking on the horses. "Mind if I sit?" Cassandra gestured to the space beside her. "It's a free country." Reid settled next to her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Your stitches are neat," he observed, watching her work. "My mother taught me," Cassandra said. "She believed a woman should be skilled with a needle, whether for fabric or flesh." Wise woman. "She was." Cassandra paused in her stitching. "She would have liked you, I think." Reid looked surprised. "Why do you say that?" She valued competence and kindness in equal measure. Cassandra met his gaze directly. "You've shown both." A hint of color touched Reid's cheekbones, visible even in the firelight. "I'm just doing my job. Your job was to track outlaws, not help a stubborn woman and her wounded brother." Reid's lips quirked in a half-smile. "Perhaps I have a weakness for stubborn women." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something Cassandra couldn't quite name. Reid's eyes, reflecting the dancing flames, held hers for a long moment before he looked away. "We should reach Helena by tomorrow afternoon," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. "Your aunt's home is in town." "Yes, on Pine Street. She owns a dress shop." Cassandra returned to her mending, her fingers suddenly less steady than they had been. "What will you do once we're there?" "Report to the territorial marshal, gather more men if I can." Reid added a stick to the fire. The Blackwell gang needs to be stopped before winter sets in, or they'll make life hell for every homesteader in the territory. And then, Cassandra tried to keep her tone casual. Once they're caught, Reid was silent for a long moment. I haven't thought that far ahead, he admitted finally. There's always another outlaw to chase. Sounds lonely, Cassandra said softly. It can be. Reid's shoulder brushed against hers, perhaps accidentally, but it has its moments. They sat in silence after that, the crackle of the fire and the distant call of night birds the only sounds. Eventually, Cassandra finished her mending and stood. I should check on Thomas, she said. Reid nodded. I'll take first watch, get some rest. Cassandra hesitated, then impulsively reached out to touch his shoulder. Thank you, Reid, for everything. His hand came up to cover hers briefly. Sleep well, Cassandra. Helena was larger and busier than Cassandra remembered from her last visit. The streets were crowded with wagons and horses, the sidewalks lined with shops and saloons. Reid guided their wagon through the chaos with practiced ease, following Cassandra's directions to her aunt's home. Martha Nelson was a widow in her 50s, with the same honey-blonde hair as Cassandra, though liberally streaked with silver. She rushed out to meet them, her face lighting up at the sight of her niece and nephew. Cassandra, Thomas, she exclaimed, embracing Cassandra as she climbed down from the wagon. Her expression quickly turned to concern as she saw Thomas in the back. What happened? Your telegram said he was injured, but not how. While Cassandra explained, Reid helped Thomas from the wagon. Aunt Martha's sharp gaze assessed the marshal, missing nothing. And who might you be, sir? She asked when Cassandra finished her tale. Reid Sutherland, Madam, U.S. Marshal. Reid tipped his hat politely. I happened upon your niece and nephew during the storm. Well, Marshal Sutherland, it seems we owe you a debt of gratitude. Aunt Martha's eyes narrowed slightly. Will you be staying in Helena long, only long enough to organize a posse, madam? Those outlaws need to be brought in. Aunt Martha nodded approvingly. You must join us for dinner tonight then, it's the least we can do. Reid looked as if he might decline, but Cassandra caught his eye. Please, she said quietly, it would mean a lot to us. After a moment, Reid nodded. I'd be honored, madam, but I need to report to the territorial marshal first. Of course. Dinner is at 7. Aunt Martha turned her attention to getting Thomas settled, directing the young man who worked in her shop to help him inside. Reid caught Cassandra's hand before she could follow. I'll be back, he said, his voice low. Take care of your brother. Then he was gone, riding down the busy street toward the marshal's office. Cassandra watched him go, aware of a hollow feeling in her chest that had nothing to do with hunger or fatigue. Inside, Aunt Martha had already installed Thomas in the guest bedroom and was fussing over him with motherly concern. The house was comfortable and well-appointed, reflecting her success as a businesswoman. Cassandra hadn't visited in over a year, and she'd forgotten how pleasant it was to be in a proper home with polished furniture and curtained windows. Now, Aunt Martha said once Thomas was resting comfortably, tell me about this marshal of yours. Cassandra flushed. He's not mine, Aunt Martha. He was tracking the same outlaws who shot Thomas, that's all. Her aunt's knowing smile said she didn't believe that for a minute. He's quite handsome, and the way he looks at you. Don't be ridiculous, Cassandra said, though her heart skipped a beat. He's just being kind. If you say so, dear. Aunt Martha patted her hand. Now let's get you settled. You can use the small bedroom upstairs, and I'll have a bath drawn for you. You must be exhausted after your journey. The hot bath was pure luxury after days on the trail. Cassandra soaked until the water cooled, washing away the dust and worry of the past week. Afterward, she found that her aunt had laid out a dress for her, one of her own creations, a simple but elegant gown in deep blue that fit Cassandra surprisingly well. I've been working on it for you, Aunt Martha explained when Cassandra emerged. I was going to send it for your birthday next month, but this seems like a better occasion. It's beautiful, Cassandra said, smoothing the soft fabric, but isn't it too fine for a simple dinner at home? Aunt Martha's eyes twinkled. Nonsense. Besides, I've invited a few friends to meet your marshal. He's not, Cassandra began, then sighed. Aunt Martha, please don't make this into something it's not. I wouldn't dream of it, her aunt said innocently. Now help me with dinner. Your marshal strikes me as a man with a healthy appetite. By 7 o'clock, the house was filled with the delicious aroma of roast beef and fresh bread. Aunt Martha's Few friends turned out to be the territorial judge and his wife, the bank manager, and the editor of the Helena newspaper, all influential citizens of the town. Cassandra understood her aunt's strategy at once, connections that might help Reid in his pursuit of the Blackwell gang. Reid arrived precisely at 7, cleaned up from his day's work and wearing a fresh shirt beneath his trail-worn vest. His eyes widened appreciatively when he saw Cassandra in her new dress, though he quickly schooled his expression when Aunt Martha made the introductions. Dinner was a lively affair, with the conversation flowing easily. Reid, whom Cassandra had only seen in the context of their homestead and the trail, revealed himself to be articulate and well-informed on territorial politics. He answered the judge's questions about the Blackwell gang with precision, outlining their known crimes and his strategy for bringing them to justice. The problem, he explained, is manpower. I need at least 6 good men who can ride and shoot, but the territorial marshal can only spare 2 deputies. I might be able to help with that, the bank manager offered. The Blackwells robbed our Helena branch last year. The bank would be willing to fund additional men if it means bringing them in. Reid nodded thoughtfully. That would make a significant difference, sir. Thank you. Throughout the meal, Cassandra found her gaze drawn repeatedly to Reid. In this setting, surrounded by the trappings of civilization, he seemed both out of place and entirely at ease, a contradiction that fascinated her. Occasionally, she would catch him watching her too, his blue eyes warming when they met hers. After dinner, the men retired to the parlor with cigars while Aunt Martha, Cassandra, and the other ladies cleared the table. Mrs. Judge Powell, a kindly woman in her 60s, helped Cassandra carry plates to the kitchen. "Your marshal is quite impressive," she said with a smile. "How long have you known him?" "Just a few days," Cassandra admitted. "He came to our aid when Thomas was shot." Mrs. Powell's eyebrows rose. "Only a few days? My dear, the way he looks at you, I would have guessed months at least." Cassandra felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sure you're mistaken." "I've been married for 40 years, Mrs. Powell said dryly. "I know that look when I see it." She patted Cassandra's arm. "Don't worry, your secret is safe with me." Later, after the guests had departed, Reid lingered in the foyer. Aunt Martha had tactfully excused herself to check on Thomas, leaving Cassandra alone with the marshal. "Thank you for dinner," Reid said, his hat in his hands. "Your aunt is quite the strategist." Cassandra laughed softly. "You noticed that, did you? Hard to miss." By dessert, I had 4 more men for my posse and funding for supplies. His expression grew serious. "We ride out tomorrow at dawn." Cassandra's heart sank. "So soon? The sooner we catch them, the sooner the territory will be safe." Reid stepped closer. "The sooner you can return to your home if that's what you want. And if it's not what I want." The words slipped out before Cassandra could stop them. Reid's gaze intensified. "What do you want, Cassandra?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities. Cassandra took a deep breath. "I don't know," she admitted. "A week ago, all I wanted was to keep our farm running and take care of Thomas. Now, Reid prompted gently, "now everything feels different." Cassandra looked up at him, finding courage in his steady gaze. "You make everything feel different." For a moment, Reid was utterly still. Then, slowly, he reached out to touch her cheek. "I've been riding the same trail for 5 years," he said, his voice low and rough. "Chasing outlaws, moving from town to town. Never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. I thought that was all there was for me." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "Until I found you trying to thread a needle in a storm." Cassandra's heart raced. "Reid," the parlor door opened and Aunt Martha appeared. "Oh." "I didn't mean to interrupt." Reid stepped back immediately, dropping his hand. "Not at all, madam. I was just leaving." He settled his hat on his head. "Thank you again for dinner." "Will we see you before you ride out?" Aunt Martha asked. "I'm afraid not. We leave at first light." Reid's eyes found Cassandra's. "I'll send word when we've caught them." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Cassandra stared at it for a long moment, feeling as though something precious had slipped through her fingers. "Oh, my dear," Aunt Martha said, coming to put an arm around her. "Men can be so blind sometimes." "He has a job to do," Cassandra said, her voice steadier than she felt. "The Blackwells are dangerous." "Yes, but that's not all there is to life." Aunt Martha led her to the parlor. "Come, sit with me. Thomas is sleeping soundly." They sat together on the comfortable sofa, the fire crackling in the grate. Aunt Martha poured them each a small glass of sherry. "When your uncle proposed to me," she said, swirling the amber liquid, "he was about to leave for California. Gold fever, you know, he had his heart set on making his fortune." She smiled at the memory. "I told him I wouldn't wait. If he wanted me, he'd have to take me with him or stay here in Helena." "What did he do?" Cassandra asked, though she knew the end of the story. "He stayed, of course. Opened the hardware store and never once regretted it." Aunt Martha sipped her sherry. "Sometimes men need to be reminded that there are different kinds of treasures in this world." Cassandra thought of Reid riding out at dawn, facing the dangerous Blackwell gang without knowing if she cared whether he returned. The idea was suddenly intolerable. "I need to see him before he leaves," she said, setting down her untouched sherry. Aunt Martha nodded approvingly. "I thought you might say that. He's staying at the Montana Hotel, room 204. I asked Judge Powell." Cassandra stared at her aunt in astonishment. "Aunt Martha, what? I'm old, not dead." The older woman's eyes twinkled. "Take my shawl, it's cool outside." 20 minutes later, Cassandra stood before room 204 at the Montana Hotel, her courage faltering. What was she doing? Proper young ladies did not call on men in hotel rooms, no matter how noble their intentions. She was about to turn away when the door opened. Reid stood there in his shirt sleeves, a look of utter surprise on his face. "Cassandra, what are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," she said, the words rushing out. "Before you leave, I couldn't let you go without..." "Without what?" he asked when she hesitated. Cassandra took a deep breath. "Without telling you to come back, to me." She met his gaze directly. "I know we've only known each other a short time, but I've never felt this way before, and if you feel anything similar, then I think we should explore it." For a terrifying moment, Reid didn't move. Then slowly, he smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face. "I was planning to write you a letter," he said, stepping back to let her enter the room. "I spent the last hour trying to find the right words." Inside, Cassandra saw papers scattered across the small desk, several crumpled sheets in the wastebasket beside it. "What were you going to say?" she asked. Reid closed the door but remained a respectable distance from her. "That meeting, you changed something in me. That for the first time since I pinned on this badge, I'm thinking about what comes after." He ran a hand through his hair. "That I'd like to come back to Helena when this is over if you'd be willing to see me." Joy bubbled up in Cassandra's chest. "I'd be more than willing." Reid's expression grew serious. "I need to bring in the Blackwells, not just for you and Thomas, but for everyone they've hurt. It might take weeks, maybe longer, I understand." Cassandra stepped closer to him. "But promise me you'll be careful, that you'll come back." "I promise." Reid reached out to take her hands in his. "And Cassandra, when I do come back, I'd like to court you properly, with your aunt's permission, of course." Cassandra laughed softly. "I think she'd be thrilled." She squeezed his hands. "Be safe, Reid Sutherland." Reid raised one of her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "For you, Cassandra Nelson, I'll be the most careful marshal the Montana Territory has ever seen." The weeks after Reid's departure were both busy and anxious for Cassandra. Thomas recovered steadily, gaining strength each day. Aunt Martha, determined to keep them both occupied, enlisted Thomas to help in the shop as soon as he was able and put Cassandra's sewing skills to work on special orders. News from the marshal's posse came sporadically. A telegram 2 weeks after they'd left reported they were following the Blackwell's trail into the mountains. Another, a week later, said they'd captured one of the gang members after a shootout. Each message included a brief personal note from Reid to Cassandra, carefully formal but meaningful to her. "All well. Thinking of you, R.S." The territorial newspaper carried stories about the pursuit, sometimes with details that made Cassandra's blood run cold. The Blackwell gang was reportedly well armed and had vowed never to be taken alive. One article described a confrontation at a mining camp where 2 posse members had been wounded, though thankfully not seriously. "No mention of Reid being hurt," Thomas said, reading over her shoulder. "He knows what he's doing, Cass." Cassandra nodded, trying to take comfort in her brother's words. "I know, I just wish it were over." "So you could get to the courting part," Thomas teased. Cassandra swatted his arm but couldn't help smiling. "Maybe." As October turned to November, the weather grew colder. Snow dusted the mountains visible from Helena, and the streets turned muddy with autumn rain. Cassandra thought often of their homestead, wondering if the roof was holding, if wolves or bears had broken into the barn. But mostly she thought of Reid, out in that increasingly hostile weather, pursuing dangerous men. One evening in mid-November, as Cassandra was helping Aunt Martha close the shop, the bell over the door jangled. She looked up, expecting a last-minute customer, and instead found Reid Sutherland standing there, his coat dusted with snow, his face leaner than she remembered but his eyes bright and focused on her. "Reid," she exclaimed, nearly dropping the fabric she was folding. "Miss Nelson," he said formally, though his eyes conveyed much more. "Mrs. Nelson," he nodded to Aunt Martha. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Marshall," Aunt Martha said, beaming. "We were just closing up. Why don't you escort my niece home while I finish here?" Reid's lips quirked in a half-smile. "I'd be honored." Outside, snow was falling gently, transforming Helena's muddy streets into something magical. Reid offered Cassandra his arm, which she took gladly, drawing closer to his warmth. "You're back," she said, still hardly believing it. "Are you?" "Is it over?" Reid nodded. "We got them 3 days ago, trying to cross into Idaho territory, all 5, including Jacob Blackwell himself. You weren't hurt." Cassandra examined what she could see of him in the fading light. "Not a scratch." Reid's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "I had a powerful reason to be careful, remember?" They walked in silence for a moment, the soft crunch of snow beneath their boots the only sound. "Your horses are at the livery stable," Reid said eventually. "We recovered them from the gang's hideout. They're a bit thin, but otherwise healthy." "Thank you." Cassandra hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "What happens now, with you, I mean?" Reid guided her around a puddle, his movements attentive. "I've submitted my resignation to the territorial marshal." Cassandra stopped walking, turning to face him. "You're leaving the marshals, but why?" "Because I've been thinking about what comes after," Reid said, echoing his words from that night in his hotel room. "And I realized I want after to start now, not someday." He took both her hands in his. "I've been offered a position as sheriff here in Helena. It's less dangerous, more settled." Hope bloomed in Cassandra's chest. "You're staying in Helena? If that's where you are, yes." Reid's expression was tender but serious. "I spoke with your brother this afternoon, asked for his blessing to court you properly. He gave it, on the condition that I look after you as well as I looked after him when he was shot." Tears pricked at Cassandra's eyes, not from sadness but from overwhelming joy. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that looking after you would be the easiest promise I've ever made." Reid's hands tightened on hers. "I know it's fast, Cassandra. We've known each other for such a short time, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Cassandra stepped closer to him, snow falling around them like stars. "I'm certain too." Reid released one of her hands to gently brush snowflakes from her hair. "What about the homestead? Will you want to return in the spring?" It was a practical question, but an important one. Cassandra had thought about it often over the past weeks. "Thomas wants to stay in Helena," she said. "He's enjoying working in Aunt Martha's shop, learning the business side, and She met Reid's gaze directly. "I've realized home isn't necessarily a place, it can be a person too." Reid's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both gentle and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Reid rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Cassandra Nelson. I think I've loved you since I saw you trying to thread that needle with shaking hands, too stubborn to give up even when it seemed impossible." Cassandra laughed softly, her heart overflowing. "And I love you, Reid Sutherland. I think I've loved you since you held that fabric still for me, not taking over but just helping, being there when I needed someone most." "I'll always be there," Reid promised, "for as long as you'll have me." "That might be a very long time," Cassandra warned, her eyes twinkling. Reid's answering smile was everything she could have hoped for. "I'm counting on it." Spring came early to Helena in 1877. The snow melted from the streets by late March, and green shoots pushed through the softening earth. Cassandra stood in Aunt Martha's garden, pinning sheets to the clothesline, enjoying the feel of the sun on her face after the long winter. The past 5 months had been a time of change and growth. Reid had taken up his position as sheriff of Helena, proving to be as skilled at preventing trouble as he had been at pursuing outlaws. Thomas had blossomed under Aunt Martha's tutelage, showing a surprising head for business. And Cassandra had found work she enjoyed at the local school, teaching the younger children reading and sewing. But the greatest change had been in her heart. Reid's courtship had been everything proper and yet full of quiet moments of connection that took her breath away. A touch of hands while walking through town. A private smile across a crowded room. Long conversations by the fire after Thomas and Aunt Martha had retired for the evening. And yes, kisses first careful and sweet, later deep and passionate enough to make Cassandra blush at the memory. Need some help with those sheets? Cassandra turned to find Reid watching her from the garden gate, his sheriff's badge gleaming in the sunlight. Even after months of seeing him regularly, her heart still skipped a beat at the sight of him. "I'm nearly finished," she said, smiling. "Shouldn't you be keeping the peace? Town's quiet today." Reid entered the garden, moving to stand beside her. "Besides, I wanted to see you. You saw me last evening," Cassandra reminded him, though she was pleased by his visit. "That was hours ago." Reid took the last clothespin from her basket, handing it to her. "Too long." Cassandra pinned the final corner of the sheet, then turned to face him fully. "Did you really come just to see me, or was there another reason?" Reid's expression grew more serious. "I've been thinking about the homestead." The homestead. They discussed it several times over the winter. Though Thomas was content to stay in Helena permanently, Cassandra still felt conflicted about abandoning the land her parents had worked so hard to claim. "What about it?" she asked. "Spring's here. If we're going to check on it, now would be the time before the planting season is fully upon us." Reid took her hands in his. "I have some time off coming. We could ride out there, see what condition it's in, make some decisions." Cassandra felt a surge of gratitude for this man who understood her so well. "I'd like that. When could we go?" "End of the week," Reid suggested. "We'd need to bring supplies enough for a few days at least." "What about Thomas?" "I already spoke to him. He's happy to stay here and help your aunt." Reid squeezed her hands gently. "This is something you need to do, Cassandra, and I want to be there with you." 4 days later, they set out for the homestead, riding the very horses the Blackwell gang had stolen months before. The journey was peaceful, the spring landscape vibrant with new growth. They camped one night under the stars, and Cassandra found herself remembering that first night when Reid had helped her stitch Thomas's wound. "You were so calm," she said as they sat by the campfire. "Even with the storm and Thomas bleeding and a strange woman pointing a shotgun at you," Reid chuckled. "I wasn't as calm as I looked, but you needed me to be steady, so I was." "You've always been what I needed," Cassandra said softly. "Even when I didn't know what that was," Reid's gaze warmed. "And you've been everything I never knew I was looking for." They reached the homestead the following afternoon. Cassandra's heart was in her throat as they crested the final hill and the soddy came into view. From a distance, it looked much as they had left it, though the roof had partially collapsed on one side. "It's still standing," she said, relief evident in her voice. Reid nodded. "Let's take a closer look." Upon inspection, the damage was significant but not irreparable. The winter had been hard on the abandoned home, with snow and rain taking their toll. The barn had fared better, its sturdier construction withstanding the elements more successfully. Cassandra moved through the small house, touching familiar objects, remembering the life she and Thomas had lived here, her parents' few possessions, the table where they'd eaten their meals, the bed where Thomas had lain wounded. "We could fix it up," Reid said, watching her from the doorway. "It would take work, but it could be a home again." Cassandra turned to him. "Is that what you want, to live out here away from town?" Reid stepped inside, moving to stand before her. "What I want is to be where you are, Cassandra. If that's here, then yes, this is what I want." "And your job as sheriff?" "There are other positions." The territorial marshal mentioned needing deputies who could be stationed in outlying areas. Reid took her hands in his. "But before we make any decisions, there's something I need to ask you." Cassandra's heart began to race as Reid reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Slowly, he knelt before her on the dirt floor of the soddy. "Cassandra Nelson," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "From the moment I saw you trying to thread that needle with shaking hands, I knew you were someone special, someone worth changing my life for." He opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful gold ring with a small diamond. "Will you marry me?" Be my wife, my partner, my home, wherever we decide that should be. Tears blurred Cassandra's vision. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Reid Sutherland, I will marry you. Reid slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepened with a passion that had been growing between them for months. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. I love you, Reid murmured, pressing his forehead to hers. More than I ever thought possible. And I love you, Cassandra replied, her heart so full it felt as though it might burst. They spent the next 2 days assessing the homestead, making lists of repairs needed, discussing possibilities. In the end, the decision was both difficult and simple. This place will always be important to me, Cassandra said as they prepared to leave. But it's the past, not the future. Reid nodded in understanding. We can keep the land, visit in the summer perhaps, maybe one day. Maybe, Cassandra agreed, but for now Helena is where our lives are. Where Thomas is and Aunt Martha, where we can build something together. As they rode away, Cassandra looked back one last time at the soddy where she had grown up, where she had met Reid, where everything had changed. It would always be a part of her story, but it was no longer her home. Her home was beside her, in the man who had held fabric still when her hands shook, who had stood by her through danger and loss, who loved her with a steadiness that promised forever. They were married that June in Helena's small church, with Thomas giving the bride away and Aunt Martha weeping joyfully in the front pew. The territorial marshal, now a friend, stood as Reid's best man. Mrs. Whittaker came from Riverspend with her family, and even old Mr. Johnson closed his store for the day to attend. Cassandra wore a gown of Aunt Martha's creation, ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Reid, resplendent in a new suit, looked at her as though she were the most precious thing he had ever beheld. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to love and cherish, to support and protect in good times and bad for all the days of their lives. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Reid's kiss was both reverent and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The reception was held at Aunt Martha's home, spilling out into the garden as the summer evening stretched golden and warm around them. There was dancing and laughter, cake and champagne. Thomas gave a speech that made everyone both laugh and cry, speaking of his sister's strength and the marshal who had saved his life in more ways than one. To Cassandra and Reid, he concluded, raising his glass, who proved that even in the wildest of wests, love finds a way. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Reid led Cassandra to a quiet corner of the garden. Happy, Mrs. Sutherland? He asked, his hands gentle on her waist. Completely, Sheriff Sutherland, she replied, leaning into his embrace. Though I'm beginning to think you only married me for my sewing skills. Reid laughed, the sound warming her to her toes. They are exceptional skills. Not everyone can stitch a man back together during a thunderstorm. With help, Cassandra reminded him, raising her face for his kiss. I couldn't have done it without you. And that, Reid said softly against her lips, is the foundation of every good marriage. Helping each other through the storms, holding things steady when hands shake, loving each other through whatever comes. Whatever comes, Cassandra agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. 5 years later, Cassandra sat on the porch of their Helena home, watching Reid teach their 4-year-old son Daniel to ride his new pony. Their daughter Elizabeth, just 2, played at her feet with wooden blocks, occasionally looking up to giggle at her brother's antics. Life had unfolded in ways Cassandra could never have predicted that stormy night when Reid Sutherland had knocked on her door. Reid had indeed taken a position as a territorial deputy, but one that kept him based in Helena. Thomas had married last year a sweet young woman who worked in Aunt Martha's shop, and they were expecting their first child in the fall. The homestead remained in the family, though they visited only occasionally. Reid had hired a local rancher to work the land, sharing the profits, keeping the property viable until perhaps one day their children might want it. Mama, look, Daniel called, sitting proudly atop his pony as Reid led the gentle creature around the yard. I'm a cowboy like Papa, I see you. Cassandra called back, her heart full. You're doing wonderfully, Reid glanced up, catching her eye with a smile that still made her pulse quicken after all these years. In that smile was everything they had built together: love, partnership, family, home. Elizabeth tugged at her skirt. Story, Mama, Cassandra lifted her daughter onto her lap. Which story would you like, sweetheart? The one about the princess, or the one about the bear cub? The one about Mama and Papa, Elizabeth said decidedly. When your hands shaked. Cassandra laughed softly. It was Daniel's favorite story too, though they told the children a simplified version, omitting the gunshot wound and outlaws. Well, she began, holding Elizabeth close as they watched Reid and Daniel. Once upon a time, there was a young woman who lived in a little house on the prairie. One night, during a terrible storm, she was trying to sew, but her hands shook so badly she couldn't thread her needle. And then Papa came, Elizabeth supplied excitedly. Yes, then Papa came, Cassandra confirmed, her voice soft with memory. And he held the fabric still until it lay quiet under my hands, and that's when I knew. Knew what, Mama? Elizabeth asked, though she'd heard the answer many times before. Cassandra pressed a kiss to her daughter's curls, watching as Reid swung Daniel up onto his shoulders, both of them laughing in the golden afternoon light. That sometimes love comes to find you when you least expect it, she said. And that the bravest thing you can do is open the door and let it in.